I'm John Sherman, here in the art gallery of the Indiana Interchurch Center, where I've had an exhibit of 32 of my large format posters of my poetry and photography for the month of March 2012. This was made possible in part by a grant from the Indiana Arts Commission, an individual artist grant that I received. And I'm grateful to the Mel Jolliffe, who's the director of the center, and the center itself for having the opportunity to do this. I'm also grateful to Ginger Beavenauer, guest curator, who helped to pull this together. And also for all of the posters, the ones in the exhibit and others that I have elsewhere, that will soon be up on my website, mesaverdepress.com. That's mesaverdepress.com. That they'll be for sale as either backed posters like this or prints that people can purchase. I'm also very grateful to Steve Donahue of Mr. Poster Broad Ripple Image Center for creating these. He did the productions for these posters and at the moment about 10 or 12 others that I have that are not in this exhibit. This poem is I Never Ate Chicken Livers as a Group, and this one is Back Home. These are both in my poetry book, Marjorie Main, Rural Documentary Poetry, about growing up on a farm in Jay County, Indiana. This is a picture of me. It's one of the few posters in the exhibit that I did not take the photo, but of course read the poem. I was about 3 years old here, and this was in our barnyard. Back Home is a poem about sort of speculating on, what's it like back home. And we were on Cheticamp Island in Nova Scotia in the fall of 2011. And I saw this building that had been boarded up, and I thought of this poem. I knew I was going to be doing more posters. Thought of this poem and decided this is the one that I wanted to merge, to blend with this image. So I shot it deliberately with a lot of vegetation in the foreground so the words could be dropped onto them and leave the building without any text over it, and the title is up at the top. So sometimes you really do plan ahead for some of these things and doing it that way. The whole exhibit is dedicated to my late parents, John and Dorothy Sherman of Jay County, Indiana. And the purpose of this exhibit is to show these 6 posters here reflect the grounding of my life in our small farm in Jay County, and then the rest of the posters reflect on living in Santa Fe and many places in Africa, and traveling to Afghanistan and Costa Rica and all sorts of places like that for business and for pleasure. So that's the intent of this journey of this exhibit. Fort Wayne is the title of this one, which startles people a little bit because that's not in Fort Wayne, but the Fort Wayne Coliseum, which is the topic of this poem, was a cultural center for us growing up. We were 50 miles south of there, and we went there for circuses, for basketball games, for ice hockey games, for ice capades, all sorts of things like that. So that's what that reflects on, comparing the lions in the circus in Fort Wayne with the lions in this Coliseum, who were chomping away at the Christians in Rome a couple of thousand years ago. This also was taken in Rome at the Vatican. This is my adult life, talks about my changing life and how we prayed for the heathens that I now call kin, talking about different ethnic groups and races and religions and so forth that I have become involved with in many ways in my life since growing up on the farm. These 2 posters were actually taken on the farm in the summer of 1966. These were shot on Monday of this week in June '66. Saturday of that same week, I went to Atlanta to join Peace Corps training to become an English teacher to go to Nigeria. And so between those 2 times, I shot these pictures. This is our old windmill that is by the house. These steps were some that I went up very scarily, 2 or 3 of them only. This is a farm implement. I'm sure what it is without seeing the rest of it. I was being very arty and thought I would do something with it one day, and about 45 or so years later I did. This is a poem called Flying Home from Kabul, where I had gone for a Peace Corps conference many, many years later when I was working in Washington for Peace Corps. But it talks about people back on the farm and others who had gone away and so on. Cages is a photo that I shot in Owerri, Nigeria, during the Nigerian Civil War. This was in a former prison in Owerri that was now used as a refugee camp. This was one of the little boys that we were taking care of with our clinic and our food. looking through the bars of the former prison into the room where we had our clinic set up. We were so close to the front lines. This was the closest that we had a clinic during the time that I was there. So close that the rockets landing were shaking the bottles on the table where we were serving the people and giving them food and medicine. The poem, however, is about something different, but I thought that it and this photo would go very well together. This picture is also in my book, War Stories. In fact, is used on the cover as well. In Memphis, Tennessee, Tuesdays at the zoo were reserved for blacks, which is another way of saying Sundays, Mondays, Wednesdays, Thursdays, Fridays, and Saturdays were not. On Tuesdays only, the giraffes came onto the grass and let the boys and girls slide down their necks. On Tuesdays at the zoo in Memphis, Tennessee, peacocks brought forth 6 gorgeous feathers, hidden in their tails for 6 days. On Tuesdays, flamingos lifted both feet in the air and remained aloft. On Tuesdays in Memphis, Tennessee, even the snakes behaved. My future wife chose a wildebeest to put golden flowers in her hair, then whispered to her of Serengeti. She placed her red shoes on his hind feet, and they danced, laughing, laughing. Finally, suddenly at 5 o'clock, little girls cried and hugged the bears goodbye. Cats licked boys' faces and rubbed their purring chins against nappy heads. The white guards awoke, and cage doors rang shut. Anne Frank, 1974. This photo was actually taken in Nova Scotia, in Baddeck, Nova Scotia, a private home. But I thought the peacefulness of this scene went very well with this poem that I had written at Schiphol Airport in Amsterdam, the day or two after we had been to the Anne Frank house on our way back to our home in Kinshasa. Anne Frank, 1974. Across the Prinsengracht, Anne Frank leaned out the window, called to her children, then smiled at me before removing her plain-colored coat. I rubbed my nose, felt the back of my neck, and a nervousness born of a joy at seeing her standing at her window, squinting at the evening sun as it made its way for the darkening sky, hinting of stars. I adjusted the collar of my coat and walked off into the evening, whistling a tune, thinking of Anne Frank at 45, wiping her hands on her apron as she called down to her children, kicking a ball along the canal, telling them to come up for supper. I, too, would have kept a diary up in the attic, would have those wonderfully mundane worries, in the days before the Nazis seized me. And just before she pulled the window shut, I would have her rub her nose, look at me as I looked back at her, and wave, then brush back her graying hair and smile for her good life, and her past untarnished by boots and thumps in the night on the stairs leading to the attic, where she and the others hid so safely for so long.